There's this tendency for some to explain away the rise in right-wing populism to simply just racism. Racism as an idea institutionally enforced in Western culture. But this isn't necessarily the case. Waving away the rise of these political movements as simply just people being racist is incomplete and sloppy. It undermines the role of the real material conditions, the developments of the capitalist mode of production that are at the root of these movements. The historic rise of Pauline Hanson's One Nation has likewise been covered extensively across social and traditional media. She and the party are portrayed as foul actors, deviations of an otherwise fine system. This video will discuss the concrete realities which facilitated the growth of nationalist politics in Australia, the nexus that has garnered around it that's worth billions, and how the vision of this movement intrinsically fails to address the many crises we face. Despite being known for its more social rhetoric around race, immigration, and culture, One Nation has its roots clearly set in material and economic concerns. There are two very specific kinds of social cleavages that One Nation manifested from: alienated blue-collar workers and small business owners. In the 1980s and 1990s, the Hawke and Keating Labor governments deregulated and globalised the Australian economy. Furthermore, they introduced legislation which effectively debilitated the trade union movement. By the late 90s, much of the traditional working class base of the Labor Party lost their secure and unionised blue-collar jobs, as now manufacturers could move overseas where they could pay workers for less. The party itself has acknowledged that this cost them electorally, as according to their own 1996 election review, it turned sour when many unionists felt their living standards were eroding and they were not consoled by the social safety net and tax reductions. Hence the moniker Howard's Battlers was born, in reference to the trend of blue-collar workers abandoning the Labor Party and its left-wing allies in favour of the Conservative opposition.
It has been a win that has not just reclaimed those who voted Liberal in the past and those who are by habit swing voters, but it is a victory that has also embraced many traditional Labor Party areas of Australia.
But while many went to Howard's Liberals and many stayed with Labor, some of the disenfranchised found a new home with Pauline Hanson's One Nation. Electorates on the periphery of regional urban centres, characterised by large numbers of blue-collar workers, small Aboriginal populations, and high unemployment, were most likely to support Hanson. It would be a big mistake though to characterise One Nation as some kind of working class party. The dominant class within One Nation is small business owners, small landholders, the petty bourgeoisie. The petty bourgeoisie are, as a class, in a uniquely unstable position. They are motivated by the fear of becoming the working class that they often employ, that being having to sell one's labour power to make a living. This fear is driven by the potential of big multinational corporations outcompeting them and thus driving them out of business. They are thus both antagonistic towards working people and towards the biggest capitalists. If you want to learn more and more about the petty bourgeoisie's political inclinations, I highly recommend this video here. As mentioned, the welcoming of global capital into the Australian economy heightened the anxieties of local small businesses. Hanson campaigned on socio-economic populism directed towards rural workers, primary producers and small business people who were being disproportionately affected by increased economic competition from third world competitors.
If this government wants to be fair income, then it must stop kowtowing to financial markets, international organisations, world bankers, investment companies and big business people.
These otherwise oppositional social classes have, however, been united discursively behind One Nation. The party's discursive construction of the other, Muslims and migrants more broadly, provide a racialized scapegoat as the cause for social and material distress. This scapegoating reduces or denies the complexities of neoliberal market reform, the exploitative processes of the global economy, and class struggle to a simplistic demonization of the other.
I believe we are in danger of being swamped by Asians.
You will hear Pauline Hanson and many of the other populist, nationalist far-right types talk about cosmopolitan elites or soulless multinational corporations, but they will only talk about, in a rudimentary sense, capitalist social relations insofar as it can be used to demonize the constructed other or outgroup. Take migrants for example. The populist right will go on and on about how immigration is driving up housing unaffordability and driving down wages, and it's being done to grow the profits of the disconnected and insulated global capital. That Australian culture and way of life is being taken away from the people by the elites who are importing masses of foreigners that will replace this nation. Using outgroups like immigrants allows the populist right to invoke a criticism of the profit motive without actually challenging it, for they are still, albeit local, capitalists. Here is an example of Hanson denouncing policies which would objectively make housing more affordable, but would impede on the profits of local developers and landlords.
The call for rent freeze will, without any doubt, force landlords out of the market and reduce the availability of rental properties even further. Their call to get rid of capital gains and negative gearing will suppress property investment and also reduce the availability of rental properties.
The party seeks to bind together the local elites, petty bourgeois, and certain sections of working people who otherwise have disparate and contradictory interests which can be vaguely smoothed over if we simply just return to what was supposedly taken from Australians, if we all reunited under one nation. Of course, it's a faulty narrative. The economic insecurity that underpinned the rise of Pauline Hanson's One Nation in the late 90s came after decades of endemic conflict between unionised workers and Australian capitalists. Australia's most tumultuous industrial conflicts, whether it be the 1890s Great Strikes, the 1912 revolt in Brisbane, the 1917 General Strike, the 1969 General Strike, were all the results of workers and capitalists violently clashing, who were supposedly united by a shared culture and under one single nation. This attempt to unify antagonistic classes remains present today. Recent polling shows that One Nation's biggest support bases are both low-income high school dropouts, people who live in the regions, and the wealthy with salaries upwards of $200,000. But while the party desperately tries to retain its working class credentials, common man imagery, uniting the battlers under the same nation, for years now, the cracks have been showing. As mentioned, the criticisms of global capitalism and capitalists put forward by nationalists are vacuous, empty, and void of any substance. While local and global capitalists are often at odds, they do share something more fundamental in common: the subjugation of working people.
Furthermore, Africans want to work, and its workers are willing to work for less than $2 per day. Such statistics make me worry for this country's future. Indeed, few now could have missed the reports of companies running a ruler again over investments that were in the pipeline, spooked by cost overruns and poor productivity. We must listen to the reports from China that Australia has become too expensive to invest in.
That is Gina Rinehart, Australia's wealthiest billionaire and one of Pauline Hanson's closest and most important supporters. She's flown out Hanson on her private jet on numerous occasions and has attended One Nation fundraising events with other wealthy donors. In that video, Rinehart was complaining that Australia might become uncompetitive on a global stage because Africans are willing to work for less than $2 a day, whereas Australians demand higher wages. Essentially, according to Rinehart, in order for the Australian economy to grow and do well, to retain local industry, wages have to fall dramatically. Sounds awfully convenient for one of Australia's biggest capitalists. In the post-war golden age that nationalists love to romanticize, it was because of the union movement, not some benevolent nationalist state, did the conditions of working people improve. Specifically, the most ardent and ambitious unions were led by socialists and communists, who often got into conflict with the nationalists of their day. Back then, everything from wages, retirement, healthcare, etc. were secured by explicit working class organizations that struggled against local and global capital alike. One Nation and its wealthy benefactors therefore want to return to a period where local capitalists weren't threatened by global multinational corporations. But because they're still bourgeois, they still hold that contempt towards the organizations that actually did improve the conditions of working people. Here, the Mining and Energy Union have documented Hanson's anti-worker and anti-union voting record. Thus, the scapegoating and targeting of marginalized groups like immigrants is the deliberate attempt to reduce or deny the complexities of neoliberal market reform, the exploitative processes of the global economy and class struggle, to a simplistic demonization of the other. So, why now? Why is One Nation surging in popularity only now? Some initially suggested that the chaotic decline of the coalition has thus translated into support for One Nation. This is generally true historically, but the degree to which One Nation has grown probably suggests something more. Like its inception, the rise of One Nation today is caused by anxiety underpinned by economic insecurity, and the presence of a far-right political nexus or an ecosystem of media, politicians and elites. The missing link, Cochrane and Naveed 2012 contends, comes from an interaction between economic misery and far-right rhetoric that turns citizens against immigrants. A poor economy predisposes citizens to accept the framing by far-right elites of the immigration issue. Today, this misery is primarily found in Australia's housing unaffordability crisis, this far-right nexus laying the blame on immigration policy supposedly designed by a consortium of leftist, liberal, cosmopolitan, capitalist universities and their friends in government. Of course, this narrative is also faulty, and you can find many of our housing problems are actually the result of problems with Australian culture which One Nation champions. If you want to learn more about that, check out these videos here. In fact, as net overseas migration has been declining for the past few years in Australia, One Nation support has only grown. This is because, again, One Nation support is generated through anxiety, through boogeymen, through scapegoating, which may be loosely connected or underpinned by the actual facts of the matter. This isn't to say that there aren't any problems with our immigration system consequential to housing. After all, the capitalist mode of production orientates everything around itself. For example, the residential construction sector has been in a deep crisis of profitability for many years now. Construction firms with negative cash flow have dramatically risen since COVID, coinciding with a falling profit rate. Since the 1990s, productivity in construction has fallen by 53%. As put by Wright and McLaughlin 2023, the residential construction industry is plagued with market failure caused by marketization and industry fragmentation, i.e. neoliberalism. Immigration has helped smooth over market failures in construction, but as put by the researchers, using immigration policy to remedy deficiencies in the system can thus be an effective short-term fix, but if this becomes a permanent solution, it may serve to further deepen existing institutional failures. But this crisis of profitability endemic to the residential construction sector and building bosses subsequently perpetually relying on finance, capital, and immigration isn't something the far right is particularly interested in. It requires a more substantive and principled critique of the capitalist mode of production than simply just demonizing immigration. It requires looking at the very fragmented residential construction sector dominated by small to medium-sized firms, which One Nation draws much of its support from. You can't come to this conclusion, you can't make these arguments, you can't come to these realizations with the framework as vapid, as empty as Australian nationalism. You will never find the answers, you will never find solutions, genuine solutions to our housing problems, to our broader economic problems in One Nation. I want to finish this video with a brief synopsis of the section containing discontent in Chapter 8 of Philip Griffith's PhD thesis, The Making of White Australia, Ruling Class Agendas 1876 to 1888. Griffiths discussed how working people and trade unions campaigned against companies importing Chinese migrants, invoking explicitly racialized rhetoric that would later formalize into the White Australia policy. Through the 1870s and 1880s, mainstream media and politicians would uncharacteristically support these unions striking against companies trying to employ migrant labor. In fact, politicians would, through legislation, make it harder for Chinese people to come to Australia, which earned them direct praise from the union movement. But it was these same politicians who explicitly colluded with local capitalists who would then turn around and violently suppress striking workers who weren't campaigning on these clear racialized lines. As put succinctly by Griffiths, the end result was that working class people voted for a government that would round up striking workers and send them in chains to an island prison. Like their predecessors, nationalists today will preach to the working class about national and cultural unity only to violently reinforce capitalist social relations, but this time in favour of a racially or culturally homogenous elite. Let's not repeat their mistakes and trust them again.